What's going on, guys? We're back with another edition of Wrestling Republic's daily broadcast. I'm your host for the day, Clark Taylor. Ben Allison has a much needed day of rest, but we will see him back very, very shortly. Today, however, I've got Kobe on the ones and twos production wise. I'll announce him even though he's off screen. And then my good friend from Philly, Anthony Ricciardi, head of opinions for Wrestling Republic. How are you on
Doing
this
all right.
Thursday, my friend? And I should have said
Yes,
the date.
these are
I
always
did miss
fun.
that.
These
I didn't mean
Thursday
to.
shows are always the best.
They are, and I didn't mean to toss that to you before. It is February 2nd. I am supposed to get that one out in the cold open. That is on me.
Groundhog Day.
But either way, we're back. Yo, it's Groundhog Day. Perfect. See, just when I needed you, right in the nick of time. That's ideal. And we'll get right into, we got a couple fun topics for today. It's Throwback Thursday, as we said. But before we throw it back, we're going to get into Dynamite from last night, it was a stacked card for a Dynamite. I mean, not that Dynamite cards aren't, generally speaking, relatively stacked. But I mean, look, when you're talking two former world champs in the opener, Hangman and Mox, multiple title matches, Timothy Thatcher making his debut, that to a smaller audience, but that's a big deal in a match against Bryan Danielson. I think that's actually the one I'm most excited to talk about of the whole card, but we'll run through it real quick and then get into our throwback topic for the day. So first match on the card, Hangman Mox 3. I want to get your thoughts, Anthony. How did you like it compared to the other two? I guess let's start there.
I mean, I like their chemistry together. They both have the wild man style. So them fighting in the crowd makes complete sense. The one thing with Mox, and I know it's a constant complaint, is I get him wanting to blade in matches, but he bladed really early in that match, which, when you do a blade job, it should add drama to it. It should make sense. It does make sense because it's a heated rivalry, but just in general, I feel like he probably bladed early, unless it was done the hard way. I don't know, but it looked like a blade, especially because of how early it was. But I enjoyed the match. I didn't like the finish. I thought it was a very odd finish for that type of match. It really didn't make sense from that. It was essentially a roll up, essentially, or a small package, right, or whatever. Yeah, but like, it's a heated rivalry. Like, why a small package? Like, it seemed to fit. Like, if it was Bryan Danielson, you're like, okay, that makes sense. It doesn't necessarily make sense with Mox and Hangman. It didn't really fit. I kind of feel like this is probably not the last match for them, especially since they really haven't done pay-per-view matches. It's been mostly Dynamite. This has been like essentially a Dynamite feud. So it wouldn't shock me if they drag this out to the March pay-per-view Revolution. That would be my thought.
That wouldn't blow my mind at all. In fact, I actually don't hate the idea. And it's funny because I'm in total agreement with you on the finish. To me, was a little bit flat. Ironically, I thought it was the best match of the 3-match series. Mm-hmm. And I was at the second match at the Forum, which was outstanding and really exciting to be there in the crowd. I thought what they did in the first match before the injury was actually the best action that they've had of the 3 until this one. And I found it funny, not funny, haha, but funny, ironic that Mox won this match via roll-up in kind of a non-finish type fashion, but not non-finish, but like he not stole it, but there was no winner. It was a knockdown drag out brawl that ended abruptly, and that's great. And it was really good storytelling. Second match I thought was, the more definitive clean win for Hangman. The injury in the first match, I think there's a story to be told on that. It reminds me a lot of in boxing and heavyweight boxing, we've had Wilder Fury recently. And in the first fight, Tyson Fury was coming off the big layoff, and he was the underdog technically, betting wise. He dominates the majority of the action. He gets knocked down late, sits up like the Undertaker iconically in the 12th round. It's a draw. In the second fight, Fury comes out and dominates. In the third fight, Fury comes out and he ends up, it's back and forth again, but he has the definitive win. I think this is unlike the Fury Wilder example there. This is one where I actually like that it wasn't that Moxley got him with the paradigm shift or the Death Rider and pinned him clean the way that Hangman did in the second match.
Yeah.
They are going to do a fourth. It does. That's the only thing about as much as I agree with you on, it's slightly disappointing that Moxley just kind of rolled him up to win it.
Yeah.
If you're going to extend the series, I think it makes the most sense because of it,
like almost like a fluke win. Like
right.
Yeah. And I did have this thought, and it's kind of funny because you and I had this conversation earlier talking about wrestling figures of all things. You talked about the barbed wire set you had.
Yes.
And I'm kind of thinking, would they go barbed wire match for 4?
Maybe even Texas Death Match.
Yeah,
or something similar to that.
Yes.
Because Hangman's had some success with those type of matches. I actually think the one with him and Archer and then also the one with him and Cole are both underrated AEW Dynamite main events.
I think his match with Archer might have been one of his best title defenses. From a match standpoint, I thought that really, for a lackluster title reign, because it really kind of was, that was a really good bright spot that probably doesn't get enough recognition as it should. But yeah, I agree with. I think it's going to involve some type of stipulation, hardcore, no holds. It's going to. Moxley loves those type of matches, and I believe wasn't the barbed wire or the death match one of the Moxley ones wasn't it at Revolution?
I believe was it Revolution or was it Full Gear? I can't remember off the top of my head.
Well, he had 2 different ones, but I think one of them was at Revolution, but I could be completely wrong.
No, because now that I think of it, wasn't Full Gear the I Quit with Eddie Kingston? If I remember correctly now. Yes. So to your point, multiple.
I kind of feel like Revolution, he did one of those type of barbed wire things, but I'm not 100% certain on that.
I mean, in all honesty, I think Hangman Page actually gets overlooked bell to bell. We talk a lot about who's the next Shawn Michaels. I see as much Shawn Michaels and Hangman Page as I do almost anybody.
Hangman is somebody that I've personally have been watching since I first saw him in Ring of Honor. And I thought, this guy's got something. Granted, he's a rookie at the time when I was really kind of seeing him, but I thought he had something. There was something there. It was not just a young guy that Ring of Honor had to push. This was a guy that legit had the it factor to, you could build around him. You could build him up. So
he has that unique charisma, I feel like, without having to talk almost, right? Body language wise, he has the it factor too, which I think is unique. There's guys like MJF and there's others who on the microphone is where you see the charisma and all that. It's almost just like the walk with Hangman.
Yeah.
He doesn't have to say much. And I think the anxious millennial aspect in a weird way too, lends him to being a babyface in today's era better than some of the other guys who have attempted to be babyfaces, where he is flawed in a sense, but he's also not exactly the anti-hero.
Yeah, it's Moxley and Hangman both in a lot of ways, straddle that Stone Cold territory where, they're a babyface, but not necessarily a typical. But again, he's not an anti-hero either. But it's along those lines. It's not the, white meat baby face. There's rebel in there, if that makes sense.
Yes. There's some also like a little just like a tinge of anti-authority, especially with Mox.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Mox definitely has patterned himself very much he's more Austin than Hangman is. Hangman is because of the cowboy thing and the Southern thing, but Mox is 100, and they've built him or they've promoted him similar to how WWE did Austin. Now, I'm not saying Mox is Austin, but just that's the tone that they're shooting for.
I totally agree. And it's funny because I actually see, and you hear Austin sometimes when people talk about Hangman, but I see more Sean with Hangman than I do Austin. I do with the athletically speaking. There's the weird, I think seeing him wrestle in jeans and boots and the way he throws a super kick, the way he does a moonsault, the way he nips up, the way he actually will sell that. He doesn't do the exact same flip corner spot that Sean does, there's some subtlety in that nobody quite does.
No,
but it's funny because there's a short list of guys that you go like, oh, see a lot of Sean and him. Hangman doesn't
Ziggler's one that gets it a lot.
Yeah.
Adam Cole gets it.
Cole, Johnny Gargano.
Gargano. I mean, I haven't heard Hangman speak of it, and maybe you have. Has he said Sean was one of those inspirations for him or not? Because it would make sense if he did.
If I remember correctly in the Van Vliet interview, he did talk about him like being one of his favorites growing up.
Okay, then that all makes sense. And that fits. Yes.
Yes, but he didn't. I don't think he necessarily has like the personal collection or connection that some.
No. I know that part.
Right. Yeah. But I do think that there would be some influence in his game, and I see it. I mean, the Urihara moonsault that he hits off of the top rope to the outside, right? Sean hit the moonsault multiple ways, and the iconic misses against Taker and Kurt at Manias are two of the ones I remember the most, but also the times he landed it. One of my favorites was the stand-up moonsault he hit at SummerSlam on Vader. And it's funny because a lot of guys don't hit the moonsault where the opponent is standing.
Yes.
And Sean would from time to time, and Page consistently has that in his arsenal on top of the nip up. And then again, the cowboy influence on the trunks. There's some Sean there too from time to time.
And speaking of the moonsault, the standing one, and I think it was the one you were referring to.
Yeah.
The one that immediately comes to mind is the Undertaker Shawn Michaels one when he does it and Taker literally catches him for the tombstone.
Yep.
That's when you mentioned that's the thought that went through my head. So I'm assuming that's where you were going with it.
And then even to add to that, by the way, the Deadeye is one of my favorite. What an innovative move. I mean, we've seen similar, but it's basically a reverse tombstone. It's just a cool move. And it's something he's shown he can hit on almost anybody. I'm a huge
and he's done it, and he's done it off a ladder.
He has. He's done it in multiple.
Honestly, as his opponent, I'd be afraid to take that off a ladder.
Of course. The one with Adam Cole too through the table was absolutely
he's done that as well.
Yes. But we've I think totally covered Hangman and Mox. So let's move down the card. Samoa Joe retains against Darby. Let's get through this one quick.
Do you want to do that one first, or because that was the main event, or do you want to?
It's the main event. I say we go in order that we've got it on our little sheet here.
Okay, all right. It's a little cheat sheet. Okay.
Yeah. So Samoa Joe retains against Darby in the main event. Wardlow comes out afterwards and calls out Joe. Just quickly, what were your thoughts? I
mean, here's the thing, and I literally just said this to you just before we went on air. I enjoyed the match. The one question that I had was, what was the point of giving Darby the title for a very short run just to go back to Joe, for Joe to feud with Wardlow? it seemed like an odd choice to do a transitional champion to flip it back for the guy he won it from. I enjoyed the match. I thought the finish was perfect. One of my concerns, and it's a problem in wrestling today, especially, and not to throw shade at AEW, but it seems to be like you'll do an insane spot like a muscle buster off the top rope onto the boards, and somebody will kick out. You'll do a really insane spot. And to me, whether it was a muscle buster or whatever, I know it's his move, but if it wasn't like his finishing move and it was just, I don't know, a brain buster, not his normal move onto the boards, that should be the finish. But it seems to be a problem a lot of times in wrestling today. Oh, it's not the finisher, so we're going to drag it out, which really kind of hurts the believability. That should have been the finish, and I'm glad it was. I was afraid when he hit it. I'm going, I hope Darby doesn't kick out of this. I hope it doesn't. This match should end here. It's a perfect storybook part for an end. The one thing that I didn't think Darby thought through was the thumbtack hoodie, because he really struggled with trying to get it back on to do his coffin death drop, and he wasn't even able to get the full thing on. And what I think hurt it visually is he hit the death drop, and you could clearly see Joe got none of those tacks. Darby landed on that himself. And it annoyed me a little bit that the announcers sold it as Darby hit him with the tacks when you saw the same screen that we did, and he missed. So to me, as the announcer, and again, I'm not a professional announcer, but I would have played up, oh, Darby missed that. Darby hurt himself, high risk, high reward. I would have sold it that way, not telling me that he hit him when we all know he didn't. That was my only real complaint. Darby, him against Joe is very much David versus Goliath, the underdog. Shawn used to do that with Undertaker fighting from underneath. Joe knows how to work that style. Darby's in a lot of ways really reckless with his stuff, and it always concerns me that he may take a risk and it end badly. I don't think unlike, let's say, Shawn, since we just talked about Shawn.
Right.
Shawn would take risk, but I think a lot of it was calculated.
Yeah.
Darby throws himself like a madman, like Jeff Hardy, but almost even more reckless, if that sort of makes sense.
I do think Darby's size, though, benefits him in that regard because he can take spots a little easier given the lighter weight.
The lighter weight, yeah.
I'm in agreement with you, though, on a lot of that stuff, and especially about this match. I don't really understand other than the pop in Darby's hometown on the transitional champion thing. It is kind of nice to pad the stats because I wouldn't exactly say they've overly hot potatoed it. They haven't done the best job with the TNT title, but it is nice to have Darby as a multi-reign guy, given his standing in the company. I'm fine with that, even though the second one's a short one. I also think it's tough for Darby as a babyface to carry it for a long time, so I don't mind him dropping it right away. But to your point, I think it's a little odd to do it immediately right back to.
And the thing is,
to Joe,
visually, and you may disagree with me on this. Okay, Joe wins it off of Wardlow. You then go to Darby, and then Joe gets back in a feud with Wardlow, and it almost gives the image, Darby's a failed champion. We're going back to what the other feud. I mean, I know that's not what their intention was, but if it's a casual viewer, let's say they happen to say it, it almost looks like, oh, they got no faith in him, so now they're going back to what was being done prior. It has that weird... I
do totally hear where you're coming from.
Yeah, and I'm not saying I feel that way. I'm not saying
Darby's
a failed, but it's kind of weird. transitional, it's almost like, okay, you gave it to Darby to feud with Joe because, and Wardlow wasn't, as far as I know, he wasn't injured, but it almost feels like Darby was a transitional
100%.
while Wardlow was dealing with something until he came back. Like that's kind of has the
100%.
Yeah.
And I hope they can get the Wardlow situation figured out. But let's move along down the card because we're Cage and Takeshita. Takeshita is on fire at bell to bell. I'm gonna jump in on this one. We're gonna be really short on this match.
Yes.
It's a little weird to me that Brian Cage has had this much time on Dynamite, and it's like, oh, finally we get to see Brian Cage, and then he loses every week. Was it a good match and was it entertaining? Absolutely. Is Takeshita actually all that he's cracked up to be bell to bell? Kind of. It looks like he is.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with Brian Cage, and I look at it this way, I don't really know what AEW really wanted to do because as a whole, it feels like the Brian Cage experiment with AEW has been a complete and utter failure because they didn't want to use him a lot, or they weren't booking him a lot, but they wouldn't let him go either. And now I think there's talk that his contract's ending soon. So it would make sense him jobbing on the way out. That is tradition to push the other people. But it is kind of funny that they're putting him on the prime time show. They're not doing these on Rampage. I understand why you wouldn't do it on Dark because no one's watching Dark. So I get that. But you'd almost think him losing.
Anthony, he's also carrying an ROH Trios championship.
Yes,
I mean, that's the irony is,
the thing is, you would think, okay, probably at Supercard, he's probably going to drop it because if his contract's up soon, they're going to get that belt off of him.
Yeah,
whether he loses it or his group kicks him out because of the losses and they replace him with somebody else in this group, that would be the thought. I mean, assuming he doesn't resign. I mean, we don't know, but based on how he's been booked, I don't know if AEW is interested in signing him, and I don't know if he's interested in staying. I mean, would he go back to Impact? I don't know if WWE would want him because of the age thing, because I think he is older, is he not?
Cage?
Yeah.
I don't think he's super old. I think late 30s.
Okay. I mean, it's possible they would bring him in. But his prospects are not, I don't know if his prospects are as plentiful as some other talent. Although I think he's a very good talent. I praised his match last year with Will Ospreay for Warrior Wrestling. I think it was one of the best matches of the year. Probably was not seen a lot because it was in Warrior Wrestling. But with the right opponent, Brian Cage can have a phenomenal match.
Oh, no doubt. Bell to bell, he's amazing.
So,
I thought his match last night looked good.
Yeah, I mean, if he has the right opponent, he can actually put together a really good match, which makes it more disappointing the lack of direction that AEW seems to have for him is disappointing.
Definitely. I would agree with that. It's been a tough ride. I think also the plan to have him with Tully Blanchard and then Tully kind of abruptly being no longer involved.
Yeah, it was a very strange situation.
That didn't help.
And they're also promoting the Takeshita MJF is a separate little feud. I know you weren't able to see it because of situation.
Yeah.
But they did an MJF segment with him essentially bribing Roosh for the match next week against Danielson. He comes in with a briefcase full of money, claiming that there's 5 other briefcases full of money, which seems like an excessive amount of money to give Roosh to take Bryan Danielson out. But besides that, it was actually a really good segment because he Roosh's manager, whatever I don't remember his name for the life of me. But he's like,
it's not Jose. It's
assistant
Jose. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, and he's like, interpreter, like I forget what he called them, but he's like the
Yes.
interpreter, and he's like, explain to him, and he explains it, and Roosh says something in Spanish, and the interpreter goes, he understands, he agrees, and one of the best lines was MJF goes, it sounded like he said a little bit more than he understands. Let me just make this clear. He goes, you don't have to like me. Just take him out. And like leaves. But like the fact he goes, sounded like he said a little bit more than he understands or he agrees.
So good.
Like I love that stuff because when MJF is sarcastic and a smart ass, I relate to that very much so. So I enjoy that because it was funny when he said that. I mentally thought going, yeah, I think that was a little bit more than that. I don't speak Spanish, but I'm assuming that's a little bit more. So when MJF said it made me laugh more because that's kind of what I was thinking.
It was a great line. It was a great line. Okay,
Yes.
so moving on to the last match we're going to talk about from Dynamite, and then we'll get into the throwback stuff.
Yes.
Toothless Timmy Thatcher versus Bryan Danielson.
Yeah.
It doesn't get much better. I thought the match delivered. I love to see Timmy Thatcher on AEW TV. I love to see him on TV, period. I kind of thought when, the run with WWE NXT came to an end, we may unfortunately find him in a coaching or indie type of a situation. I don't know if it's a long-term deal, but even if he's just there every now and again to put on matches like this on AEW, I want more of it. His facial expressions are as good as they get in the game.
Yeah,
his grappling is sublime. The guy's awesome.
He's very much, and you and I think I said this on a previous
Yeah.
pod. He's a very old school guy that you would almost think he's out of his era. Like he seems to fit more with Thesz. And there was one thing that they had mentioned on commentary, which I thought was a great comparison. Wrestling started with traveling circuses, and they would fight local people. Oh, can you beat our wrestler? Whatever it is. Thatcher is the perfect specimen of somebody that would be the traveling circus wrestler to beat up all the local people and take their money. That is probably the best comparison I've ever heard for Timmy Thatcher. I enjoyed the match. I selfishly wished it would have been a pay-per-view match and went longer with no commercial interruption. I personally am not a fan of the picture-in-picture only because I feel like it takes me out of the match because it's put in a small block and I'm hearing them talk about Domino's Pizza or an insurance company while I'm trying to look at,
If Domino's wants to sponsor us, though, we're cool with them talking about Domino's.
Absolutely. You can sponsor us anytime. But again, my focus is on Domino's because that's what I'm hearing, and it's in the bigger screen, despite I'm trying to look at the small screen of that. That's a side thing. I've written about that. People complain. That's just a side thing.
I'm with you.
But I would love to see those two in an Iron Man. I'd love to see them 2 out of 3 falls, or submission, or an I quit. Like I would love to see a long-term feud with Thatcher and Danielson. That style, I would love to watch that for me. So you knew Danielson was going over. I mean,
for sure. In this
he's
one,
he's the AEW guy. He's in the feud. He's supposed to win all the matches to get to MJF. So you knew that going in.
Yeah.
But the match was still entertaining. But like, I would kind of like to see a feud with them outside of this MJF bubble of he must win the matches. Because if it's outside that bubble, then it's like, well, no, Thatcher could actually pick up a win.
Yeah.
Like that's,
when I even laugh, like obviously hindsight's 2020 and we know Regal's not there anymore, but wouldn't have Thatcher been great? Thatcher would have been amazing for the Blackpool Comeback Club. Like
Thatcher would have absolutely been.
He fits it better than anybody that was in it.
It would not shock me if Regal was the one that hand selected him for NXT. When he was brought in, because Regal. I mean that you could easily say he's Regal's kid. Like, I mean,
Yeah,
it's
he's as good as anybody.
he's the exact, he's very Regal. Like,
That's his style.
I mean, Regal did that stuff when he was starting out. He did the circus thing and beat up the local people. Like, he did that stuff.
100%.
So yeah, it totally fits.
Yeah, and so I mean, honestly, overall though, I thought exciting Dynamite. It was a good week. It was a good week for sure. But let's move along.
Yes.
We got to see this week WWE 2K23. We got to see some initial looks.
Yes.
We got to see some new game modes.
Yes.
We're going to talk a little bit about that, but mostly about it's Throwback Thursday.
Got it.
Our favorite wrestling games of all time.
Yes.
We're not going to rank them or anything. We're just going to talk about them.
Mm-hmm.
But so what were your initial thoughts on, I mean, we saw War Games. We got to see all that.
That was one of the complaints that 2K got, that, every year it's cookie cutter. You're releasing essentially the same game. You're just doing a new paint job, throwing some new people. And 2K20 was an absolute disaster. It's the only game that I returned for a refund because it was so bad. And I was very happy that the wonderful people at Amazon went, we'll take it back. So I was very excited about the game last year. They took a full year off. Now the concern was, okay, now they're releasing another game. Are they going to go back to that same pattern of going, we're just going to change a couple things? No, it appears it's more than just an updated roster and a paint job. We are getting War Games. That, I think, that to me is a selling point in itself. The fact that we're going to get.
Quick question though, Anthony.
Yes.
Did you see? Because I watched the footage, but I wasn't paying enough attention.
Yes.
Is it 4-on-4 or 5-on-5?
I believe you can do 3-on-3 or 4-on-4.
Okay,
I don't think you could do 5-on-5.
I think 5-on-5 would be excessive anyway within the gameplay, but I just was curious. Yeah.
Well, I mean, Kobe backed it up. It's 3-on-3 or 4-on-4.
Perfect.
And plus that gives them something for next year going, wait, we added 5-on-5.
5-on-5.
But just the fact that, it's 2 cages, it's 2 rings, it's 4-on-4. And based on the gameplay that I saw today, which they did on Up, Up, Down, Down, they actually played through a match. It looked fluid. As before you enter the War Games chamber, the next person comes in, the third person that comes in, you can actually go onto the ring and pull out weapons to bring into the War Games match, which I think is phenomenal. It looked great. Xavier Woods did a spot where he did the springboard move, but he literally jumped from rope to rope into the other ring. It looked awesome. I'm very excited about the game. AEW has their game coming out. I have that on order as well. We grew up in an era, and I know a lot of the viewers didn't. We grew up in an era. There were 3 major wrestling companies. There were 3 different wrestling games.
Oh yeah,
almost every year. Well, especially at least 2 of them. ECW had a game here and there, but like every year, WWF would come out with one. WCW would come out with one. I miss those days when we had multiple wrestling games to play. Like that was a thing. For me, my all-time favorite from the old era, if you want to call it, of games, I loved WWF SmackDown, or it might have been WWE at that point. WWE SmackDown, Here Comes the Pain
versus Raw. Yes.
No. It was the last. I think it was the last. It was the last of the SmackDowns before they went to Raw
with Lesnar on the cover.
Yes.
Wait. Is that the one where they had like the huge backstage setup for like the first time?
I mean,
you could go back there. You're like in the locker room. You could.
I think it was the locker room, and they might even had Times Square that you got on the subway. I think it might have been that rooms. But it had the most insane roster. Like, I mean, everyone was in that. Everyone was in that one. And that was the game. And Clark, I never even told you this. This is I'll tell you this live. This game I enjoyed so much. I did not buy Raw vs. SmackDown. Like I kept playing the old game, and I played it. I didn't get a Raw vs. SmackDown game till 2007, so I think it was like the third Raw vs. SmackDown. And the only reason I got it was because my Here Comes the Pain finally broke from overplaying it.
SmackDown vs. Raw was a dang good game too. I remember that had one of the best career modes, and then GM mode was at its finest on SmackDown vs. Raw, I think. But I will say this, two of my favorite growing up was, number one, WCW Revenge was off the charts. NWO, it had the entire cruiserweight division, and the way that it had the player select organized, I think to this day is the most user-friendly pick your character in a video game, because you had the NWO black and white, the NWO red and black, then you had the WCW like main heavyweight contenders.
Yeah.
And it was Raven's Flock. Then it was by stable and
you know what the funny part is, I remember playing WCW Mayhem.
Yes.
And they kept, and again, it was a different company. EA made that versus THQ.
Right.
They did the same thing. Like they were broken up by stable, which was, and it's funny, like WWE's never done that. As far as I could, no, I don't believe they ever did.
For character select, it was amazing. And then
it was fun, yeah.
But I'll never forget, the most disappointing thing was immediately No Mercy comes out, and No Mercy has the real entrance music. So that was ball game. It was game, set, and match there.
And the interesting part of this was that Acclaim was making WWF games, and THQ was making WCW.
Right.
And I don't remember the specific details, but whatever
I believe THQ, the first WWF game they made was No Mercy.
Or did the first SmackDown come out first?
I think it was No Mercy on
it. I have to look. I know SmackDown came out for the PlayStation. No Mercy came out for N64.
I believe No Mercy is the same engine as Revenge.
Yes.
Revenge came out first, and then No Mercy was essentially Revenge, but the roster organization wasn't the same because it was WWF, but it did have entrance music.
Yeah.
Because I know my favorite thing about it, because on N64 is it was just, you walked up to the guardrail instead of like under the ring, and it was one of like the C buttons on the side to get a weapon, and there were no tables. Kobe, WCW versus the World 96. No, what was Kobe?
What was the first THQ WWF
game?
Yeah,
that's No Mercy.
But I don't remember how the contract situation ended, but like WWF's contract with Acclaim was ending.
Right.
WCW's with THQ was ending. THQ, I don't know if they decided they jumped to WWF, because at that point WWF was back in the lead. So
because they had WWF Monday Night Raw, I believe, was the last Acclaimed N64 game.
Yeah.
I was a big N64 gamer.
So what?
No Mercy was the first one. There we go. I called it. Hey.
Very nice. I didn't have N64, so I trust you on that. But so I was a PlayStation guy. Still am. But THQ took over WWF games. Acclaim ended up doing ECW games.
Right.
And the last two WCW games were actually done by Electronic Arts.
When then Midway did the TNA game. Sorry,
which is disappointing, because it was one of those ones I always wanted to play, because graphically, it was on the PlayStation 2. Like graphically, those graphics for the entrances would weirdly hold up today.
They were outstanding
on the modern systems.
Impact was also Wii. Thank you, Kobe.
But the WCW game, the first one was Mayhem. And that game is famous for being the first wrestling game that you were able to go backstage.
Right.
But it's funny, like I recently heard that Acclaim was toying around with the idea of WWF Attitude, which came out before Mayhem.
Right.
That they were considering having backstage, which that would have been, that is, I mean, a WWF Attitude was the last one of the WWF PlayStation Acclaim era.
Acclaimed games, yeah.
And this is something you may remember, you may forget about this. I remember having that game on pre-order.
Oh.
And it kept getting delayed because when it was supposed to come out, that was when the Owen Hart tragedy happened.
Right.
So the game got pushed back, I think about 3 or 4 months. It ended, I think it was supposed to come out in April, and I think it came out in August. And the opening was, it did the Owen Hart in tribute to Owen Hart graphic that WWF was using at the time.
Yep.
And that was the very last WWF game that had Owen Hart in it.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
That's the last one. And then I believe he was in, I do think he was in Legends of Wrestling, which was also made by Acclaim. They had all the independent guys in it. So one of the things to look forward to coming up for the AEW game is it's the first game Owen's been in since, I believe, the Legends games.
In the 90s.
Yeah.
I guess the early 2000s.
Yeah. Now, I mean, the Legends one were ones that, I mean, it was independent. They had insane rosters. I never actually played them, but I believe you said you did. And you said that the rosters were unbelievable.
The roster was fantastic, and it was one of the first games where you could easily download like roster mods, and so you could get the WWE roster on Legends and like quite easily, in fact.
Yeah.
Get the WWE roster, and it was a fun game, and they had a cool thumbtack animation. The only thing that was limited, I would say, were the movesets. Outside of finishers, about everybody had the same moveset. Right?
Yeah.
The finishers were unique, but it's pretty much you could hit a DDT, you could hit a suplex, you could hit a German suplex, you could hit a clothesline. Like,
and I believe they were the last wrestling games for Acclaim. I think they made 2 of them.
I believe so. Yeah. Acclaimed. Yeah, I think Acclaimed kind of focused on the skateboarding game scene after that.
Well, I think they went under,
and they did. Yeah.
They did. So it's very funny watching just the advancement with the wrestling games and just video games in general, from when we grew up. And it almost sounds like we're prehistoric at this point, but like, my first console was the original NES.
Of course.
So, thinking of, I played Little Mario, and now you'll look at where things are now. It really is wild, and it makes you appreciate it because you know where this came from. It's not, but with the wrestling games, the advancements, like my first one,
amazing.
The first one I remember playing when I started becoming a fan was WWF Warzone. It will always have a special
Warzone
place.
Was great.
It was a great game. By today's standards, it's a limited roster. I think it was, I don't know, 12, 15 people. It was not a huge roster.
No, it was a tiny roster.
But it was kind of funny because you would have weapons matches, and it would be like really weird stuff. It would be like you could just hit a guy with a whole TV. Like it was
definitely.
But Acclaim, the Attitude game was essentially Warzone, but with a much more robust roster. And a lot of creativity where you could set up your own pay-per-views. You can have matches with different lighting. Like I know you could have wrestled matches with no lights on whatsoever.
They had a lot of good things. They had a lot of good things. But so we're getting down to the nitty gritty on time here. I think I'll say this. I still, No Mercy, maybe my favorite game. And if there's going to be influence on the AEW game, I'm excited about that. But this War Games thing, I'm super jacked for. Do you have anything you want to get in before we sign off for another Throwback Thursday?
No, I mean, listen, I'm sure we'll be talking more about 2K23 as that comes out. And whenever Fight Forever actually does come out, we'll be talking about that too, I'm sure.
Absolutely. And then next Thursday, you and I will be in our team gear. My Chiefs are in the Super Bowl against your Eagles. It's going to be a blast. We'll be back with another Throwback Thursday next Thursday. We'll be back with another daily broadcast tomorrow, Friday. Like, subscribe, do all of that stuff if that's cool. It's been awesome. Another daily edition of the daily broadcast brought to you by Wrestling Republic. And thanks so much. Yeah, tomorrow I believe it's noon Pacific, 8 GMT, and then or GBT, whichever one it is, and then classic 9 a.m. Hawaiian. So we'll see you guys then.
It's the only one you're confident on the Hawaiian.